KARN News Time is 7:45, and on the live line with us on this Veterans Day, Representative Tim Griffin, here to talk to us about some legislation that he has introduced regarding veterans. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Appreciate you joining us. Well, if you would share with our listeners pieces of legislation that you've introduced.
Sure, I appreciate you having me on. Well, these are an attempt to improve on benefit that already exist. First of all, there are a lot of veterans that complain about having to wait in long lines at the VA to get some paperwork so they get travel that they may have taken for health care reimbursed, and that is a benefit that they get. And a lot of these folks standing in these long lines are not in the best shape in terms of physically. And so we started looking at this and found that if the VA would simply make the deadline based on an individual veteran's birth month, they could reduce the lines because they divided up by month instead of having this one deadline. And that will cut down on the lines and alleviate some of that mess, hopefully.
That's
one of the things.
Very controversial. So there's.
Well, no, it should be a pretty straightforward deal. That's the kind of deal that we try to get passed on what's called suspension of the rules in the House, because you're able to get a lot of people to sign on it, and hopefully we'll be able to get that through. The other two, one of them, we heard from veterans who said, GI Bills are awesome. You're able to fund college and traditional education, but some folks want to start franchises like McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever, and a lot of these franchise opportunities require significant education, not like 2 weeks, but some of them months. I think the McDonald's one is like 6 months of school. Well, you can't use the GI funding for that sort of education. You can only use it for the more traditional ones. And so what my bill does is it says, using the funds that are there, let's allow more flexibility for veterans who want to start a franchise to use that money for franchise education in addition to the traditional. We looked at some stats. I think there's like 800,000 franchise jobs created by veterans. And so that also seems like something that we ought to be able to get a lot of support for. And then thirdly, we hear a lot about the Guard and Reserve versus the active duty in terms of different treatment. And, I've been in reserve for 15 years, and over the years, a lot of those gaps have been closed so that active duty and Guard and Reserve are treated equally. Well, there's one area with regard to education where active duty go in residence, they sit in the classroom or what have you and take the courses, and Guard and Reserve may do a little of that, but they do most of it online. Well, the active duty get credit, the Guard and Reserve get credit for these classes, but the active duty actually get a master's degree for the same work. And so the Guard and Reserve do not. And what we're attempting to do with this third piece is just say, hey, let's treat them all the same. If they're doing the same work, meeting the same requirements, they ought to get the same thing, whether they're Guard Reserve on the one hand or active duty on the other. Again, I don't think that's going to be particularly controversial. We were happy to see Major General Wofford, the head of the Arkansas National Guard, we were happy to see him speak out and say this is something good that he thinks ought to be done. So, these are not new benefits. This is an attempt to take benefits that already exist and just sort of be smarter with the administration of them, really. And so we think we'll be able to get some wide support for these.
All right. Well, good luck with it. Thanks for joining us on this Veterans Day, and thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
Thank you. Thank you to all veterans.
KARN News Time is 7:49. We check